Hi there, it's the Common Magician, and I want to try something interesting with you. I've got a deck of cards here, and you can see that the cards are all different. Everything is on the up and up here. This is a regular deck of cards, and I want you to make a selection, but I want to make sure that your selection is absolutely free, that you have choice in the matter here. You don't have to get pinned down to any one selection, but you can change your mind. Just put one finger out and touch the back of any card that you want. Let's say that you go with this one here, and I might say you can stick with that or change your mind if you want to. Let's say you change your mind. Again, it wouldn't matter. Let's say you go with this one right here. So what I want you to do is, from the free selection of 52 cards, I want you to remember that one. That is your card right there, okay? And I just want to remind you that you could have picked any one of these cards at all. Totally free selection. In fact, you can probably see your card in there somewhere, the one that you picked. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to be thinking about your card right now. Just be thinking about it. I want you to concentrate on where you saw that, somewhere around the middle. And we're gonna kind of pretend to reach in, take your card and slide it out, flip it over, and then slide it right back in where we found it. Can you imagine that? Now, the interesting thing is that I haven't been touching the cards. You made your selection and I put the deck down. And we just imagine this little scenario playing out here. And you can see in this moment something very fascinating has happened. If we take a look, we should find your card has flipped over inside the deck. The only one in the deck which is facing the other way. Greetings from the Common Magician. It's been a while since I've posted anything, but this is going to be another long-form tutorial where we're going to take a look at a particular effect that is quite popular, and we're going to try to make it a little bit more popular, at least for you, by making it accessible with a regular deck of cards. We're looking at the invisible deck plot, the invisible deck effect. Now, if you know, the invisible deck is one of those tricks if you do it the traditional way, which does use a gimmick deck. I don't think that's a secret for those that are aware of the effect. If you do it the original way with that gimmick, it is absolutely magical. It is like the Burglass effect, which we've talked about before. It's one of those kinds of tricks that is absolutely impossible, and it will, fry people when they see it every time. The hang-up with the effect is that doing it the traditional way does require that you have a complete separate deck of cards just for that one effect. You can't really do the effect the way that gimmick deck allows you to without having the gimmick deck. And, if you're performing a show, perhaps it would be fine to have one of those, and you just do a switch or a swap at a certain point and perform the effect. Particularly if you're kind of in a stage environment and you get the help of a volunteer, then you're also keeping spectators away from the deck of cards, and there's no cause for examination. However, if you're like me and you do this sort of as a hobby around friends and family, with regular decks of cards, that's not really possible to do that particular effect in that particular way. So we're going to try to find ways to get there, at least from the audience experience, the perspective of the audience member, the spectator, getting them to essentially feel the same effect or recall the same effect as if they saw that original sort of presentation using a regular deck of cards. Now, this is going to be very similar to the Triumph long-form tutorial that I did, the Comprehensive Triumph tutorial, and that we're going to look at several different methods that address several different issues with accomplishing this effect. And I'm going to show you kind of the more popular ways to do it. But this is also going to be like the Acon video that I did, where we're going to be talking a little bit about theory. In fact, we're going to be talking about some of the same things that we addressed in that video, which is really about the psychology of the spectator and what they perceive is happening and what they recall has happened. Again, this does not stand up to video. This is not something that you would do for a video performance and post on YouTube and claim that it is the invisible deck. This is just a presentational thing that you do for live people, where in the recollection of what you've done, they don't really distinguish the difference between what you did and what could have been done with that gimmicked variation, which is absolutely magical. So that's my introduction. Let's talk briefly, though, about what is the invisible deck and what goes into that effect, because there are turnover effects, right, where a card turns over, and then there's the invisible deck. What is different between the two? Well, in general, really there's no difference at all between the two, because the assumptions are all the same, that between the invisible deck presentation and then just any other kind of turned over card sort of effect. The assumption is usually that the thing that happens invisibly. First of all, that a card turns over, it is invisible when it happens. There's no move associated with it. And that also the cards are not handled in the process of doing that there's no funny business going on. It just seems to happen magically. And then the last assumption is that any card could have been selected, that there was a really true free selection. Now, what does differentiate the invisible deck presentation from other turnover card effects is the verifiability, right? You can verify that these things are true. In the invisible deck presentation, a spectator is asked to think of a card, and they can think of any one of 52 cards. Then, after they've named the card, a deck is taken out of the pocket and presented, and the deck is immediately spread, and the card is presented as being turned over. So, everything there is just very clean, very, very trimmed down to just the essentials, and thereby you get this verifiable truth that the selection was totally free, the cards were not handled, and it happened invisibly. So on top of that, the invisible deck usually has a plot. Now, a lot of people don't use this plot, but it usually has a plot which gives it its name. The invisible deck usually goes something like this. Think of a card, name the card that you have. Let's pretend that we have an invisible deck. And out of this invisible deck, we're going to take your card out and turn it over. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it away, and let me take it out again. And then you bring out a real deck of cards, and then you show that what you did here has happened here, kind of like a voodoo sort of, a voodoo doll sort of effect, where you're pretending to do something and then it actually happens in the real thing. That's the typical plot, which is why it has its name. The second way that it's often presented is like I described earlier, where you have a deck of cards, and it's more like the invisible card routine, right? Where you take a card invisibly out and turn it over and put it back in. So one of these kinds of plots is usually part of that presentation. Let's talk about what is going to be required here. I have some notes over here. What's going to be required to get to where we need to be? We are not going to be able to really have a card thought of and have the deck not handled and have an invisible kind of cause going on. Those three things we really can't do. We have to come up with a turnover utility of some sort that we can do in such a way that people don't see it, that it's not noticed. Okay, so we have to find a way to do something that absolutely is not invisible and make it appear as if it happened invisibly. Okay, so that's one thing we got to do. The second thing is that we have to create somehow the assumption of clean or no handling of the cards, even though we are going to have to handle the cards and it isn't going to be clean. Okay, we have to create the psychology, the psychological recollection that the cards were not handled in any extensive way, okay? And then the last thing is we have to create the assumption of an absolutely free selection. We have to create that assumption either by making the spectator think or recall that they freely thought of a card and there was no control going on, or at least getting them to equivocate between thinking of a card and selecting one of 52 cards out of the deck and having their choice to change their mind, right? So they really got a free selection. So either making them think that they thought of it, or equivocating, getting them to see that there's no difference between the two and accepting that this trick really was a totally free selection involved, that they really could have done anything that they wanted to and could have come up with any card that they wanted to out of a truly fair situation. So we have to do that. Now, how are we going to do it? Really, this comes down to separating the dirty work from the start of the trick. And this is what I've talked about before in other videos, particularly in that Akon video with the Burglas effect. Performing this in a more impromptu, ungimmicked way is going to require us to separate the dirty work from the start of the trick. Again, this is a psychological principle that does not play to video. This is something that plays to live people, real people, where in their experience they perceive that the trick has started at this point in time, when in fact the trick had been going on for several minutes prior. And all of the really hard stuff had already been done. But now is when the trick begins. Now is when I have this deck of cards and I'm not going to touch it. And you're going to do this. You're going to deal with it. So we have to really create that moment. Any way that we can do that will really allow us to do just about anything with a deck of cards. And this is true for any trick. This is true for any kind of presentation. Now, you can't do this for every trick that you do for people. If you're doing 5 tricks for people, which I don't recommend you do unless you're doing a street show or something and you really have to keep a set going. I recommend you do only 1 or 2 tricks for people at a time in an evening in a setting, and then save up and do 1 or 2 some other time, maybe just 1. If you're doing more than that, then you have to be careful trying this sort of programming of the mind, because people will catch on to it after you've done it for 3 tricks in a row. But we can get people to think that a trick starts here when actually it started way back there. Okay, and I'll just throw these out to you, just some of these phrases, and we'll talk about them as we get into some other methods, the mechanics of what's going on here. I showed you one presentation at the start of this. That's just one presentation. We're going to look at 5 or 6 here in total. That will get us kind of to the same place. And they all will vary in the way that cards are selected, thought of, or whatnot, and the way that the card is turned over, and there'll be a combination of different things going on here. But if you want to separate the start of the trick from the dirty work, you want to use terminology like this. Say, let's try something now. Okay, so let's say you've had a card selected, right? The card is known, or card has been thought of, or whatever the case is, and you've been, dealing with the cards. You say, let's try something now. What you're doing is you're programming into their minds that now, that word now, this is when it starts. Another way to say it is, now that we are ready. Okay, a card has been thought of, you've named it. Now that we're ready, let's try something, which is the reverse. It's the same thing, right? But you're saying now is the time. Now the trick begins. Okay, so let's try something now. Okay, I think we're ready. Let's try something now. Now that we're ready, let's do something here. And hopefully by that point, when you're saying that, you can really just relinquish control. And move on with the real effect. Okay, so those are a couple of terms. Another way to do it is to say, here, you do this. Okay, you turn over the cards at a point after all the work has been done, and you give it to the spectator, and really you're in the same place as you were with the other terms, the other phrases. You say, here, you do this. That imprints in the spectator's mind that the thing that's going to happen is going to happen now. Oh, and they're going to do it. They're going to be the one to deal with it, okay? So here, you do this. Or another way to say that is, here, I'm not going to touch the cards, okay? I'm not going to touch the cards, and you set them down. And what that does is it's a lie that says that the thing that's going to happen is going to happen now, as opposed to before. When actually the thing that's going to be seen to have happened, it already happened. Okay, so it's the fib. It's that magician's lie that you're telling. I'm not going to touch the cards, and you set them down. These are different ways to psychologically create in the spectator's mind that the trick is beginning at this point in time when actually the trick may have already been accomplished. So we'll, again, address these terms as we go along through here, but that's just a quick introduction on what we're about and what we're going to be trying here. Do not underestimate this tactic. This tactic works for live people. It works extremely well, okay? And that's really what the channel is about here. We're talking about performing for real people, flesh and blood performances, not creating YouTube videos. There's a whole other kind of magic that's for YouTube videos, the don't see me flash kind of stuff, that's out there. This is not our concern. Our concern is dealing with people's minds and their recollection. So don't underestimate this. Use this tactic in all of your presentations. Use this all the time. Get the dirty work out of the way, and then program your spectators to believe that what is going to happen is starting at this point in time. A little bit more on that as we get into this. So let's get into the first idea that I have for you. Okay, let's get into the first example here. But before I do that, I just want to say a little bit more on the separation of the delaying of the start of the trick. Back in 1979 to 1983, the famed magician, mentalist James Randi, who was really spent much of his time as a skeptic, I guess you would say, someone who was outing these people that were claiming to have super extrasensory sorts of abilities and powers, and were fleecing people for their money, demonstrating those powers. He came up with this thing in the early 80s, 1979-ish, called Project Alpha. And he had a couple of young unknowns, unknown magicians, had a little bit of skill, mentalists. One known as Banachek now, but his name was Steve Shaw. And the other one was a fellow by the name of Michael Edwards. These were young guys. People didn't know them. He presented these individuals as if they had telekinetic sort of powers, that they could move things with their mind and they could know things before they happen. And he had them studied by scientists, by a group of scientists and psychologists, and convinced them that these individuals actually had these powers, only to reveal after several years of this study that actually it was all a hoax, and that these young guys were just able to convince these scientists under scientific test conditions that they had these powers, when in fact it was all an illusion, it was all a trick. It was a demonstration of how people can fool spectators, even very smart ones, just by being a little bit smarter and a little bit more clever about their tactics. Now, the reason why I bring this up is that the number one rule about the success of this hoax was this: you can't lie to a video. You just can't lie to video. These young fellows were told by Mr. Randi, who was coaching them along, behind the scenes. They didn't know that they were associated with him. He told them it is essential that you get them to shut the videotape off, that they turn off the cameras, that so long as the cameras were running, this wasn't going to work. You have to get them to document your abilities with the cameras off. And there's no way around that, okay? And I just want to say they did this for several years and convinced, a scientific community that they were actually doing something that they couldn't do. And it was essentially by duping them at their own rule, by violating the number one rule, which was get it on camera. Instead, they got them to, at various times to get the cameras to turn off, to present what they were doing without videotape evidence. And then they were able to get it documented on paper. In some cases, they were able to get get the conditions right with the video off, with the cameras off, and then once the conditions were made in their favor, they were able to get it on camera, and that was also helpful too. So what we're doing is we're dealing with that. This is not about video. This is about people's brains. This is about how people perceive things and how you get them to think what you want them to think. Okay, so just remember that before you hit that dislike button or give me some nasty comment about how this is not the invisible deck. We're not after that gold standard presentation. We're after gold standard recollection. We want people to remember that what happened is exactly like that gold standard presentation that we can't do, okay, with a regular deck of cards. Okay, so let's take a look at the first example. We have a couple of things that we can do, okay? We can either turn a card over. We actually have to turn the card over, okay? Or we can turn the deck over around the card, okay? And then there's one other option we'll talk about when we get there. But essentially, in this effect, you have to either do this, okay, and get it back, or you have to do this and then get it back in. You're doing one of those two things, okay? You have to do one of those two. Again, there's another option that we'll look at the end there that relates to the first presentation that I showed you. But we have to deal with that. So how can we do that? Let's take a look at our first option here. So option number one is the Brower reversal. This is a well-known technique to reverse a card, and this is the variation of reversing a card that is actually not turning a card over, but is actually turning the deck over around a card. And there's a couple of ways to do that. So the brow reversal, the way this would work is that you would need to have your selection made, and we'll talk about this briefly right now. What is a free selection? Well, I talked about this on my Any Card at Any Number video, and it's the same here. This is pick a card. Okay, if I do this and I have someone select a card, that's picking a card. They can pick any card that they want. It's any of 52, but the problem here is that the deck decides what they pick. Okay, they pick the card, but the deck decides what it is. Whatever the order of the cards are, that's what it's going to be. This, however, you should note, is not pick a card. This is actually think of a card, because when a spectator is selecting a card face up, they have the choice of what they pick. The deck doesn't choose anything. They can go to whatever card that they want, okay? This is think of a card. This is, really essentially the same thing as having no deck at all and saying, go ahead, think of a card, think of any card in a 52 card deck. Doing this is the same thing. So you can either do this and get all the way to the think of a card kind of scenario without actually having them just think of one, right? By doing this, you can have some control over the cards. Or you can just give them choice. If you give the spectator choice to go wherever they want, can you like that one? You can change your mind, right? When you do that, it essentially will impress in their mind an equivocation between the two, thinking of a card and picking a card. The fact that they could have really made any choice that they want. Even though the deck is, telling them what it's going to be, well, they could have changed their mind at any time. They could have changed their mind as many times as they wanted, and they finally came down to a result. So I just want to get that out of the way. Let's assume that they have selected a card. We'll do it the face-up way. What we want to do is we want to get the card controlled either to the bottom or the top. In the case of the Brower reversal, it's a top card kind of control. So one way I like to do it, that I really love the spread call, and I can't find a trick that I can do where I can't do it with, without a spread call. I can use a spread call to do just about anything. We can use it right here for the control. So let's say that they're thinking of any card they want. Say, just call out any one that you see. They say the 8 of diamonds. You say, great, 8 of diamonds. We have one right here. And note that there are no other 8 of diamonds in the deck. And what I've done is I have controlled it to the top. Okay. I'm not going to talk at great length about the spread call because that's not what this video is about. But in general, the way this works is that when you get the card of of interest, let's say the 4 of spades. You're going to cover that card with the receiving spread like this, and then underneath you're going to slide it out with your free fingers and get it free so that you can slide under the all the other cards in the deck until you get it to the bottom. Okay, so that is a spread call. Now, once I've done that, what I can do is I can turn my deck over. Now, this is a very, very benign looking procedure. That's why I like the spread call. This doesn't look like I'm doing anything really unusual. Now is where it gets a little unusual, okay? And that's where we have to do the actual move. You need to get a break underneath that target card, which is now on the top. And what you would do is you would do a cut. And this is an awkward cut. I really don't like to do the move this way. I've got some other moves that we'll look at a little bit later here that accomplish the same thing. But we're going to cut half the deck on top, over top of that break, by lifting and then setting it upside down. And then we're going to take the other half under the break and do the same thing again. So now what I've got is I've got my target card underneath the deck facing up. So I've taken the deck and I've reversed the deck around the card. Now all I need to do is I need to give it a cut to get the card to the middle. Okay, so I've accomplished what I need to do after going through a think of a card moment. And then what I can do, I'm going to show you this subtlety very quickly. We'll address this later on. I used it in the initial presentation as well, even though I didn't use this method in that. This is a subtlety in which you apparently show the deck freely, but you do not, you hide something they don't want to see. You can say, now just remember, you could have, and you want to do this fluidly, by the way. You would cut it as you're talking. You might say you could have picked any one of these cards here, and then you go on to do a spread. And when you get approximately to the middle, push off a block and then spread the rest. Okay, so at speed it looks kind of like this, where you get to the middle, push off a block, and show that. Fairly dirtily, right? Very dirty, very loose, not a very clean sort of spread, but just very loose. You could have picked any card. In fact, there's a little bit of a flash there, right? You could have picked any card that you wanted. And what you've done is you've given a subtlety in the spectator's mind that there's nothing going on here, right? That they really had a free selection. Second subtlety is what I call a miscall. Miscalls are very useful. People don't use it enough, I think, these days. But that's when you say that something is there that isn't. It might be something like this. And you named the 8 of diamonds, is that right? And I'm holding a card, and the assumption here is that I'm holding the 8 of diamonds as I look at it, but it's not. It's the ace of diamonds, right? So a miscall is when you say that something is there when it isn't. You can say, as you go through, you can even see the 4 of spades in there right there, right? And even though we didn't see it, you just claimed to have seen it. Now you're set, right? You've done the dirty work. You've given a subtlety that presumes the opposite of what you've done. They don't know what you're about to do, so they don't even know what to look for at this moment. Now you're ready to lay on them that line. Here, I want you to do this. The trick starts now, okay, by saying that. Or now that we have that, let's try something. And then you get your hands off, and the dirty work's been done, and now it's time to do the effect, which is the turning over the card. And then this is the final resolution. So that's the brow reversal version of this, where you do the dirty work offset from the presentation, and you can cover your tracks with a block push-off sort of subtlety, where you don't see that card in the middle. Okay, so you have to manage your space and know that the card is in the middle, and then push off. By the way, that subtlety really only works with bordered cards. You can't really do turnover card effects very well with borderless cards, so that's true for all of these options. Let's take a look at the next possibility, which is going to be a similar kind of turnover, which is a little bit cleaner, I think. This is a gambler's cop turnover. It's kind of like a half turnover pass. So let's look at that one next. So very briefly, in a nutshell, a half pass is when a card is, or a part of the deck, I guess you would say, is going through the normal motions of a shift or a pass, but it's only half completed. Okay, so for example, if I take the bottom section, right, and I want to pass it to the top, kind of in a Herman pass, I would turn the deck, and then I would bring it up to the top, under cover, right? The top would come back on top. A half pass doesn't do that full motion. It just turns over one section on the bottom. So a half pass would look something more like this, at least on the Herman sort of pass rendition, where the bottom would be coming to the top. We're going to deal with the bottom. The half pass would look something like this, where everything looks the same, but when I square, I've actually squared the deck half the wrong way on the bottom. You don't do that with a full deck of cards. A half pass is usually used on one card or a packet, and we're going to do something like that, but we're going to apply the turnover pass to that. Now, the turnover pass, I actually have a video on passes and shifts. You can check that out on the channel. The turnover pass, this is at a bad angle, so I'll just show you what happens in a turnover pass. The turnover pass is a Herman pass where the top rotates up as the bottom rotates down, and then you transpose the halves. So it looks like you're doing this, but you're actually doing this, right? And from a right-sided angle with cover, that looks very clean. You don't see the bottom half turning over. We're going to essentially do that, but we're going to give it a lot more cover. And it looks something like this, where we're going to take the card, which has been controlled to the bottom. So you want to get your card down on the bottom. We are going to, in fact, if we were doing it this way, just to kind of sort this out, if we were doing it this way, where we're doing a think of a card kind of thing, like we did in the last example with the brow reversal, say Ace of Hearts, and we spread call that and get it down to the bottom. What you want to do is when you bring your spread back together, up jog all the cards over top of that one card. This is a little bit of a tip here for control. So what that does, it gives you the ability to grab with the pinky and get a break when you square. So now I've got a break underneath my bottom card. I'm going to do my cop this way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the cards back deep into the palm, into Gambler's Cop, like that, which is a deep palm, a deep-handed palm, right, where the card can stick out because you have angle coverage all the way around here by this hand, the front, and then the wrist over here. And then you're just going to give the deck a turn. Now, this works best when you give it right-handed coverage so that you can't see from this angle, or when you give it wrist coverage, okay, so that behind this edge, you can't really see that tail end sticking out, and you're free and clear on the front because the card is deep in the palm. Now what I've got is I've got the card deep in the palm, turned over on the bottom of the deck. Okay, so I've done my turnover move just in the matter of turning over the deck. So it would look something like this. Get a fresh card in there. So here's my call very quickly. We're going to call the Queen of Hearts. We get that out. Again, you don't have to use a call. You can use any kind of control to get the card to the bottom, whichever one is you like to do. If you like to do double undercuts, do that to get it where you want it to be. So now I've got it right there, and then I'm going to cop it back and turn it over. I don't know if we got that on camera or not, or if it was a clean look. You do have to manage your angles. But in the process of closing the spread and just turning the deck over, it's a very benign appearance. I've got my card now where I want it to be. Now what I can do is a couple of possibilities to get it cut into the middle. I could just cut. But if I don't want to do that, I can give some motivation. I can say, now just remember, you could have picked, any one of these cards at all. It doesn't really matter. You had a free selection in there. I could even follow up with that subtlety, and I give a block push-off with my card facing, the wrong way, but inside of a block. So there's a couple ways that you can get that card more centralized. Peel off a handful, get them to the bottom, and then you're ready to go. Now at this point, you can delay the start of the trick. You can turn them over for them to do whatever voodoo you want them to think they're doing, and then do the presentation, and then there's the card turned over. So that is a Gambler's Cop turnover, a pass sort of thing, a half pass, using the deep palming method to hide the turning over of the deck. Okay, so that is another method to get that card turned over. Good luck with that. The next one we're going to look at is actually my favorite one of all these, but it requires some handling of the card. So you really want to play up the displacement of time when doing this, but it is going to be a shuffle reversal. It's going to be a time when we're going to do the brow reversal where we're turning the deck over on the card, but what we're going to do is we're going to do it in the motion of an overhand shuffle, and this is a very, very good deceptive way to do it. Okay, so this is a shuffle reversal, and again, it's a brow reversal form in that we're turning the deck around the card. And it's just motivated by an actual move. Now, the problem is that there's handling. So there's handling of the cards. This is really where the delay in the start of the trick is going to count to your benefit. What you're doing may look like a benign procedure, but you really want to separate the handling and messing around with the cards from the beginning of what's going to happen. And people may, be able to think back to that moment, well, you were just handling the cards quite a bit. I don't know what you did in there. So you have to manage this pretty well and really limit your handling to just this one shuffle. But here's how it looks. Same kind of thing. You would need to control a selection. You can do the thought of approach that I talk about with the cull, or you could do a picked card or whatever. You essentially just need to get the card to the bottom in the manner in which you're going to be shuffling it. You can do it face down or face up. It doesn't really matter. Let's just stick with our habit here and do our spread call. So we've got a selection, let's say the 6 of hearts. We get that called down to the bottom of the deck, get my break. Now, what I'm going to do is much like the Gambler's Cop, I'm going to get some coverage from my front knuckle here. I'm not going to bring it back in my palm, but I'm going to bring it down like this. So it's sitting more on my second finger, like that. And I can grab it here by my pinky on my left hand because I've held my break from my spread. So I'm going to hold my break and get it low, and then I'm going to bring the cards forward and give a left-hand view. I'm going to bring the cards forward and sweep over that card so it can't be seen. This is invisible, okay? You can't see this from the front. You can't see it from this side, not in any meaningful way because you have hand coverage, and you can't really see it from the other side because it's facing you and your body's in the way of it. If you want an invisible way to turn over a card, this is the one. So you sweep forward, and then what you do is you begin shuffling. So squarely right over top of that turned over card. And then it's just a simple matter of routine to follow up with an additional shuffle. So you shuffle about half and then put the last half of the deck back on top. And now you have everything set. So very quickly it looks like this. Hopefully we're getting things on the camera here. I think I'm running into the upper edge. So let me show you one more time. We do the free selection. Again, the call, let's say 6 of diamonds. We call that card to the bottom. We get our break in there, and then we do our shuffle. So you just do a regular overhand shuffle, get to about half and throw it on top. And the pattern during all of this is, you had a free selection of any one of these cards. You could have picked any one that you wanted out of these 52. Just saying something like that as you're doing it. You might even say, it doesn't matter if I know where the card is, it just matters that you don't know where it's at, right? Just some kind of a pattern talking about the order and the fact that their selection was absolutely free. You just fill your moment with that. And then actually that's it. That's a very benign looking kind of motion. It's just a single shuffle. That doesn't look like any kind of turnover business is going on. It's just a shuffle. And really, you don't have to touch the deck after that. So you can then turn it over, create your delay and the time, and say, now I want to try something really crazy. This is so crazy, I'm not even going to touch the cards, okay? In fact, I want you to do this, all right? I want you to think of their card, and I want you to, you just set the parameters of when the trick begins there, and then you allow it to play out, as we've been talking about, and of course, the dirty work's been done. So that is a shuffle reversal, kind of a variation on the Browery principle, where you're turning the deck around the card itself. So that's my favorite. If I ever really need to get a card turned over for an effect, I almost always use that method because it's just so angle-proof and very, very simple to do. And the procedure to do it looks really, I don't know, it looks unassuming. An overhand shuffle is one of the most sloppy things you can do with cards. Right? This is the shuffle that anybody can do in a card game, whether they know how to handle cards or play the game or not. Okay? So doing this doesn't look like anything else. It doesn't look like any kind of handling. to accomplish your feat. So that is the shuffle reversal. Let's take a look now again at the half pass, coupled with a pass, to make something that might actually be absolutely invisible. If you're good at shifts and you're good at passes, you may want to think about this option to get a card reversed. So we're going to couple a half pass, like the gambler's caught pass that we did a little bit ago, that turnover move, with a regular shift, just a regular pass. And what this does is if you have good shifts and you have good pattern misdirection, this looks like you're not doing anything with the cards. It looks like you are completely clean in all of your motions. So let's take a look at what this is. You would have your selection made again, thought of card kind of presentation. You need to get control so that your card is on the bottom of the deck, depending on how you have the cards. It doesn't really matter. It could be face up or face down, I think, for this. But you have it set with your break. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to do a half pass, a regular half pass. You could do the Gambler's Cop one, but it's better if you just do a regular one because the Gambler's Cop requires that you turn the deck over. If we do this half pass, it doesn't look like you're doing anything. You just talk about how the selection was freely made, and then in that moment you get the card. In fact, I flashed right there. You see what's going on, but you get the card turned over. So this is a Herman pass, Herman half pass. Let me move it forward so you can see a little bit better. Again, you just lift on the deck, and you want to give right-sided view. This is better if you're standing, so you can shift your body. You give right-sided view as you're talking, and you're not really doing anything with the cards. And in that moment, you turn the card over. It's actually deep in my palm, facing the other way now. And then I can give it a square. Now what I want to do is I want to give it a regular pass. Now, at this point, I should probably do a turnover pass because I'm looking at the cards face up. If, though, I was doing this with my card face down, let's say I did a pick a card variation, and they picked, this one right here, the 6 of hearts, I can do that same control to get it to the bottom, get my pinky, do my half pass, hopefully quieter than that, and then as I'm talking, I'm going to do a regular Herman pass. And the regular Herman pass is just a regular flipping of the bottom section on top of the top. And I like to do it like this, where you turn the deck around to set it down. So again, check my video on passes and shifts, and you can see how a Herman pass works in the mechanics. Hopefully that looks okay on the camera. This is something, again, that doesn't look like you're doing anything. All it looks like is that a card was selected, the spread was closed, and then in the process of doing these moves, there's nothing happening as far as the spectators are concerned. This requires a great deal of verbal misdirection. It does, to get a pass to get by people. Passes are not things, in my opinion, that are burnable. They're not something that are intended for live people to focus on. Yes, you can do passes that are burnable for a camera from a very specific angle, but when you're dealing with real people in a real environment, you're best to complete passes, actual passes and shifts, by giving a great deal of misdirection or motivation or pattern. Again, the benefit to doing this is that it doesn't look like you've done a thing. It doesn't look like you have handled the cards in any way. It literally looks like a selection was made, like the spread was closed, and like you set the deck down. And that gets you where you want to be just by doing those two. Okay, so combination, half pass and then a full pass gets you there. So play around with that. By the way, a regular pass is one way to get a card that's been turned over on the bottom of the deck into the deck. So you can couple a pass or a shift with any one of the other options that we've talked about for minimal handling. So you could do a brow reversal that gets your card turned over, and then follow that up with just a shift or something to get it where you want it to be. So use shifts, use passes. That can get you in the right setup so that it's in the center, flipped around. Number 5 here is one that I've already done a video on. One of the very first videos I've done on this channel was a impromptu invisible deck routine, which really looks, if you want to get as close as possible to the real thing, this is probably the way to do it. And it uses a different principle that we're going to look at in two different ways here, and that is using a substitution. One version of this is where we're substituting a card that is not the selection, and it stands in for the selection, sort of in a miscalled way, until we do the reveal. And at that point, we do some kind of a switch for the real card. So this is going to require more control than any of the other examples, but it is a really clean one if you work it out. Okay, so the way I've presented this in the past is to do the reversal with a shuffle. You can use any one of the reversals to get a reversal at the beginning, or the better option is have the card reversed ahead of time. So let's look at it that way. Okay, I've already shown you some ways to get a card reversed, but that's kind of the preset idea that you would be looking through the cards, verifying that they're all different, and then you do a call. And I just called the Queen of Hearts, and then I do a shuffle, overhand shuffle reversal, and I get my card so that it is reversed about in the bottom third. Okay, or rather the top third as I'm holding it here, the bottom third as I'm looking at the cards. And what I do is I've got my Queen of Hearts already there. Now, I can have them think of any card. Literally think of any card. I would say something like, look, they're all different. I've done my shuffle. They're all mixed up, right? That's your pattern and your premise for doing that. And then I say, think of any card, not the Jack of Clubs because we're looking right at it, but think of any other one. And then they would give their choice. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. I have a card that is face down in here that is presumably going to be their card, but it isn't. It's actually a Queen of Hearts. If they say Queen of Hearts, which is a very popular card to pick, I'm done. The trick is done, and this would look absolutely amazing to people. Okay, again, one way to do this is just have that card already turned over in the deck before you even approach anybody. Okay, so you don't have to do anything in front of people. This is more of an impromptu sort of setup, so that you, in front of people, you can do a little bit of trick setup by getting a reversal on an indifferent card, or a tactically chosen card like the Queen of Hearts, just in case they pick it in that third. Okay. Now, the rest of this, as I demonstrated on that other video, and you can go back and see that for a little bit further teaching on it, what we're going to do is we're going to do a spread call again, and we're going to call out the card that they actually named. So let's say they named like the 8 of Diamonds. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cards deep into the palm so that I have kind of coverage in the front. This is how you would hold for like an Erdnase type grip, where you're giving a lot of coverage on the front of the deck with the first finger. Okay. The reason for this is that I want to hide the index over here between my finger and my thumb, so that as I spread, I can see the index pop up before other people do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for their card, the 8 of Diamonds. Okay. I'm going to say, let's look for that card right now. And as I go through, I'm looking for when I run into it, and I actually have it right there. Now, at an even level to them and with a little bit of coverage, they would not see that show up, and I can quickly spread call that out and start shoving in all the other cards on top of that card. Now as I go through, I'm waiting for that moment when I run into my reversed card. And all the while, I'm spread calling their selection to the bottom, okay? And they wouldn't see the face of that, right? So I square up, and then I'm going to strip out their card and flip over the deck. And I say, and you were thinking of a specific card. You thought of that on your own without any kind of influence from me. At this point, I caught a pinky break with a spread underneath what is actually the 8 of Diamonds. And then I'm going to place the indifferent card on top, ready for a double lift. And then I show. Okay. Other ways to present after this situation has been set up. You could also do a push-off double, which is what I normally do. And the way I do it is I push off one, and then I grab the second, and they might not be aligned, but I necktie the deck a little bit and reach out with my finger, and then square as I pull back and turn it over. That's the one I like to do. And then you can also do a cleanup. The cleanup for this, if you want, the best cleanup is to just turn it over after you've shown it and cut the deck. That's the best cleanup, really. But if you want to hand the card out, if you absolutely must, and you've got touchy-feely people that want to get their hands on it, you show, and then you can turn the deck over and you grab the top card and thumb out the target card and just give it a little bit of a flick, and you've actually stripped off the cover card there. So that's one way. Another way to do this is to do a second. So you might just do a second deal, okay, which I have a video on that as well, that relates seconds and double lifts, push off double lifts as being the same thing. So you could just do a second deal out so that you can present their card. So I would not recommend doing a top change for this, because once you get to here, the focus is on this card. Top changes are good when the focus is not on the card, okay, before you get to that point. You're at that point right now. So this is a great way to do a totally impromptu invisible deck that actually gets you very close to the real thing, because other than the fact that you are really, it's it. I mean, this is the real thing. Because they're able to think of a card freely, and they're not selecting from an open spread. So this gets you there all the way. I still stand by that one, but it is a little risky, and it takes a little bit of maneuvering that you have to be comfortable with. So the next one that we're going to look at, the last one, is actually the one that I presented, which is a little sly, a little tricky. So let's talk about the last option here for the invisible deck. So this last one is the one that you saw at the beginning of this video, and this is not impromptu. This is not an impromptu solution. It's not a totally ungimmicked solution, but it does use a regular deck of cards. So there's that. You can use your regular deck of cards and have one extra thing on you if you like to carry a deck of cards around. This is just a good thing to have anyway. With your deck of cards, you'll find many, many, many uses for it, and that is a duplicate. Okay, so you have one duplicate card that also is inside your deck, and inside my deck, I've got my real 3 of diamonds that belongs to this deck, 5th card from the top. That's how my setup works. My 3 of diamonds is going to be, my duplicate is going to be in the bottom 3rd, facing up, and then I'm set up. Okay, so this is not impromptu, but it does use a regular deck of cards. You could easily do this with a walk-around pack of cards and a duplicate that you just, keep with your jokers and, whatever other cards you keep in there. A lot of people walk around with a double backer or something like that. So you could do that. I think I even have a double. So I have a double backer with this deck over here. So, just put it in there to, 2 jokers. All cards come with 56 cards in the deck. There's 52 regular playing cards, 2 jokers, and then 55 and 56 are usually the rules of the game, or the hands, or some kind of advertisement. These other 2 cards, you could have a double backer and a duplicate, and then you would have 56 cards that would very easily fit inside the box in the tuck case, and it wouldn't really be extra. You'd have the normal number. Okay, so a duplicate. This is really sneaky, but it gives us a lot of freedom because we don't really have to do a lot of moves, and that's what's nice about this. All I need to do is I need to force my card. Now, I have it set up again for a spread call force because I just love it, but you can do any force you want. It does not matter. The way I have it set is I'm going to do the spread call force because this implies free selection. This is a lot like pick a card, any card. The spread call force works like this. I like to do it this way with my target card about 5th from the top, as long as I know where it's at, so that I can spread off and then call out that card and then keep it reserved underneath until we get to a place where they're happy. It's very important, though, that my turnover card, I got to remember that it's in the bottom 3rd. So I need to get them to make a choice before we get down there. Okay, I need to manage my spectators. So they get to their selection right here. I square up the cards over top of my force card, which I've called. They look at that, they memorize it, and then I'm going to place it back on top. Now what I want to do is I want to get my card a little bit more central. So I'm going to do this game, which you remember from the video at the beginning. I might say, now look, you could have picked any one of these cards, right? I might even do it this way, so I kind of imply pushing cards off onto others, right? Like this. I can apply this and then set them on the bottom. Now it's more central, and then I can do my subtlety, which I did in the video, where I say, in fact, you can probably see your card in there somewhere. Now, their card actually is in there. It's right there. And if they see it, it doesn't really matter, okay, because this will make it all the more magical. But you're going to present there as if their card is not been turned over yet. Okay, you're showing very faithfully what's going on, and then you can turn the deck over. Now, what I've done, if you think about the perspective of this, there's been absolute free selection, which is a requirement. Could have changed their mind. There has been no moves at all. There are no moves in this, none whatsoever. They've been spread, it's been selected, it's been shown, and it's set down. Okay. Now that we have that, let's try something. I give my delay. This is the start of the trick. I let them do all the magic. This is totally magical when they can then spread and then show that card has been turned over. So that is another solution. Now, the nice thing about that is that because I did that, I now have control of my duplicate, and I can easily get rid of it if I want to go on to another trick, because I pulled it out of the deck. I can palm it off, get it out of there, or just leave it and just leave the duplicate inside. I can just work with two of the same card in that deck as long as I don't show it. As long as I'm careful to not show all the faces. So those are my, possibilities for this. Again, do not underestimate the psychology of dictating when the trick starts. That is very beneficial to any trick that you're doing, to get the dirty work out, front-loaded on the effect, and then put the effect after that moment in time when the trick begins for the spectator. Will really ramp up the effectiveness of your magic. So good luck with that. I wish you the best of luck with your turnover card trick invisible deck routines, and hopefully you found this helpful, and I wish you happy magicking.